30 minutes. That's all it would take for a missile launched from North Korea to cross the Pacific and head straight for an American city, carrying a nuclear warhead powerful enough to erase millions of lives in a single flash. And the most unsettling part is this: North Korea now has almost everything it needs to make that nightmare real. In this video, you're going to find out whether North Korea can really hit America with a nuclear missile, what technology it already has, what's still missing, and why many military analysts believe the final gap could be closed much sooner than most Americans think. By the end, you'll be able to judge for yourself if this is mostly political posturing, a limited but manageable threat, or a fully operational nuclear strike capability aimed at the United States. We're not starting with vague hypotheticals. Right now, as you watch this, North Korea fields intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, that on paper can reach almost any point in the continental United States. It has conducted multiple nuclear tests, including devices large enough to qualify as thermonuclear weapons, and it has publicly shown off missiles fired on lofted trajectories high into space to demonstrate extreme range. The question is no longer, can they build a missile that reaches us? The question is, can they do it reliably, under real war conditions, with a nuclear warhead that survives the trip and detonates as intended? To understand how we got here, zoom out to the geopolitical context. On one side, you have a small, heavily sanctioned, authoritarian state, traumatized by the Korean War and decades of isolation, convinced that nuclear weapons are the only insurance policy against regime change. On the other, the United States, a global military superpower with treaty obligations to defend South Korea and Japan, forward deployed forces in the Indo-Pacific, and a strong political incentive to prevent any direct nuclear threat to American cities. Caught in between, Seoul and Tokyo, within short and medium-range missile distance, and beyond them, Guam, Hawaii, and the US mainland. From North Korea's perspective, nuclear weapons are not a luxury. They're survival. Pyongyang watched what happened to Saddam Hussein in Iraq and Muammar Gaddafi in Libya. Two regimes that either gave up or never finished nuclear programs and were eventually toppled with Western involvement. The lesson North Korean leaders took from that history is brutally simple. If you want your regime to live, you must have nuclear weapons that can hit your enemy's homeland, not just your neighbor's capital, their homeland. Over decades, that logic turned into a national project. North Korea built its nuclear and missile programs step by step. Early on, they focused on the basics: plutonium production at Yongbyon, crude nuclear devices tested underground, and short-range missiles aimed at South Korea and US bases in the region. Then came bigger ambitions: medium-range missiles that could reach Japan, followed by intermediate-range systems that threatened Guam, and finally intercontinental designs intended for the United States. Each test, each launch, each satellite put into orbit wasn't random. It was a data point, a stepping stone toward the day Pyongyang could credibly say, "We can hit America." Technically, an ICBM nuclear capability rests on three pillars. First, the missile itself, a rocket powerful and reliable enough to send a warhead across thousands of miles, often more than 8,000 or even 10,000 kilometers, to reach cities like Seattle, Los Angeles, or Chicago. Second, the warhead, a nuclear device miniaturized and ruggedized to fit on top of that missile without falling apart under intense vibration, acceleration, and weight constraints. Third, the reentry vehicle, a heat-shielded shell that protects the warhead when it plunges back into Earth's atmosphere at speeds that can exceed 20 kilometers per hour, enduring plasma extreme temperatures and brutal G-forces in the final minutes before impact. North Korea has shown progress in all three areas. Its Hwasong series ICBMs, including solid fuel variants, suggest ranges that cover the entire US mainland. Solid fuel is a huge leap because it allows faster launch times and less preparation, making missiles harder to spot and destroy in a first strike. The country's nuclear tests, from the mid-2000s through the late 2010s, show increasing yields and indications of miniaturization, and lofted trajectory tests, where a missile is fired unusually high instead of far, indicate enough energy to reach American ranges if fired on a normal, flatter path. But the single most contested piece of this puzzle is that reentry technology. Launching an ICBM is one thing. Bringing a warhead back through the atmosphere intact, on target, and timed correctly to detonate at altitude or on impact is another. Analysts have debated whether North Korea's tests have truly validated a reliable re-entry vehicle for long-range shots at the United States. Some argue the regime still needs more full-range testing under realistic conditions. Others warn that in a crisis, betting on maybe they can't is a deadly gamble. As we move into the next part of this video, we'll walk through the history of North Korea's nuclear tests, the timeline of its missile development, and how each milestone pushed Pyongyang closer to an operational ability to hit America with a nuclear missile. And pay attention to one key thread. Every time the world thought sanctions and pressure had slowed them down, North Korea found a way to test again, launch again, and move one step closer. The story of how North Korea got here doesn't begin with modern ICBMs. It begins with a small, war-scarred state emerging from the ashes of the Korean War and tying its security to great powers like the Soviet Union and China. In the 1950s and 1960s, Pyongyang received basic nuclear know-how and reactor technology from Moscow under the banner of peaceful nuclear energy. That cooperation laid the foundation for the Yongbyon nuclear complex, a facility that would later become the heart of North Korea's weapons program. As the Cold War evolved, North Korea's leadership grew increasingly distrustful of both the Soviets and the Chinese, determined not to rely on anyone else for its survival. Over the following decades, Pyongyang used a mix of legal and illicit channels to acquire technology, learn from foreign designs, and build its own capabilities. Publicly, it talked about nuclear energy and research. Quietly, it focused on producing fissile material, plutonium, and later highly enriched uranium, that could be turned into weapons. The world truly woke up to the scale of this program when North Korea withdrew from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and began expelling inspectors. But even then, there was a lingering hope: diplomacy. The so-called six-party talks brought together North Korea, South Korea, the US, China, Japan, and Russia. Agreements were signed, promises were made. Yongbyon was frozen, then partially disabled. Fuel oil and aid packages were delivered. For a brief moment, it looked as if the North might trade away its nuclear ambitions in exchange for security guarantees and economic relief. That moment didn't last. Political mistrust, disagreements over inspections, and shifts in leadership on all sides eventually caused the talks to break down. Each time negotiations collapsed, North Korea responded with something louder: a missile test, a nuclear test, or both. In 2006, Pyongyang carried out its first nuclear test underground. The yield was relatively small, but symbolically, the line had been crossed. North Korea was now a nuclear-armed state, however primitive its arsenal. Subsequent tests in 2009, 2013, 2016, and 2017 showed a clear pattern: increasing explosive power and growing sophistication. North Korea claimed miniaturization, meaning it could fit nuclear devices onto missiles. It hinted at thermonuclear or hydrogen bomb designs, far more destructive than simple fission weapons. While outside experts debated the exact yields and designs, the direction of travel was unmistakable. Each test sent a message: we are not stepping back, we are stepping up. Missile development followed a similar trajectory. Early short-range Scud variants threatened South Korea. Then came Nodong missiles capable of striking Japan. Later, intermediate-range designs put Guam at risk. The turning point came when North Korea tested the Hwasong-14 and Hwasong-15. Long-range missiles that, even when fired on steep, lofted trajectories, demonstrated enough energy to suggest they could reach parts, or even most, of the continental United States if fired on a standard path. When Pyongyang unveiled even more advanced designs, including solid-fuel ICBMs, alarm bells in Washington grew louder. Meanwhile, the US and its allies were not standing still. To counter the growing missile threat, the United States deployed systems like THAAD, the Terminal High-Altitude Area Defense System, to South Korea and Guam, and relied on ground-based mid-course defense systems at home. along with Aegis destroyers equipped with ballistic missile defense interceptors. These systems are designed to detect incoming missiles, track them, and launch interceptors to destroy them in flight. But there's a hard truth about missile defense. It is not, and has never been, a perfect shield. Tests conducted under controlled conditions show impressive success rates, but real combat is messy. An adversary can launch multiple missiles, use decoys, change trajectories, and try to overwhelm defenses. And as North Korea moves into hypersonic glide vehicles and more advanced reentry vehicles, the challenge becomes even greater. So, where does that leave the United States today? In a world where a small, impoverished, isolated country has invested decades of resources into a single goal, making sure that any attempt to topple its regime could cost American cities an unthinkable price. The US still holds overwhelming nuclear superiority. But North Korea doesn't need parity. It just needs enough survivable capability to make a first strike against it look insane. As we head into the final part of this video, we'll bring everything together. North Korea's ICBMs, its nuclear warheads, reentry technology, US defenses, and the logic of deterrence. And then, we'll ask the hardest question of all. If you lived in Seattle, Los Angeles, or New York, would you bet your life on the assumption that North Korea probably can pull off a nuclear strike? Let's put all the pieces on the table. North Korea has demonstrated ICBMs with enough theoretical range to strike the US mainland. It has detonated nuclear devices powerful enough to qualify as serious strategic weapons, and it claims to have miniaturized those warheads to fit on its missiles. It has tested missiles on steep, high trajectories that suggest, if flattened, they could cross the Pacific. It is working on advanced re-entry vehicles and even hypersonic systems designed to complicate interception. The remaining technical doubts focus on reliability. Can North Korea guarantee that an ICBM-mounted nuclear warhead would survive the extreme heat and stress of re-entry on a full-range shot toward the United States? Would that warhead arrive close enough to its intended target to matter? Would it detonate at the right moment? Those are non-trivial engineering challenges. But from a US strategic perspective, the bar for credible threat is not perfection, it's possibility. If you're a decision-maker in Washington, you don't need to be convinced that every single North Korean missile will work flawlessly. You only need to believe that some of them might. If there is even a reasonable chance that one or two warheads could get through and hit a major US city, that possibility alone transforms your calculations. Do you risk a preemptive strike if the price of miscalculation could be millions of American casualties in Los Angeles or Seattle? This is where the concept of second strike capability comes in. North Korea doesn't have to be able to win a nuclear war, it just has to be able to survive a first blow and still hit back hard enough to make that first blow suicidal. By dispersing mobile launchers, building hardened facilities, possibly expanding to submarine-launched systems in the future, and increasing the number of missiles, Pyongyang is slowly moving toward that kind of credible deterrent. The more missiles it has, and the more sophisticated their trajectories and decoys become, the harder it is for US missile defenses to stop them all. On the other side, US defenses like ground-based mid-course defense, Aegis and THAAD provide layers of protection, especially against limited attacks. They are designed to reduce the damage of a small number of incoming missiles, not to create an impenetrable bubble. In a scenario where North Korea launches a handful of ICBMs, there is a decent chance that some could be shot down. But decent chance is not the same as certainty. And if even one gets through, the result is catastrophic. So, can North Korea really hit America with a nuclear missile? In strict engineering terms, there may still be unanswered questions about the reliability of full-range re-entry vehicles and the exact performance of their warheads under combat conditions. But in strategic terms, for deterrence, for US planning, the answer has effectively become yes. The United States now has to operate under the assumption that North Korea either already has, or will very soon have, a workable ability to deliver a nuclear warhead onto American soil. That reality has enormous consequences. It makes any talk of regime change by force vastly more dangerous. It emboldens Pyongyang to push harder in crises, knowing Washington has to think twice before escalating. It may push allies like South Korea and Japan to reconsider their own nuclear options or demand stronger guarantees from the US. It further complicates an Indo-Pacific environment already strained by great power competition with China and Russia. 70-plus years after the Korean War armistice, the Korean peninsula is still technically at war. The difference is that now, the North is no longer just a conventional threat to Seoul or a missile threat to Tokyo. It is, or soon will be, a nuclear threat to American cities themselves. That's the strategic endgame Pyongyang has been working toward for decades. An endgame where its very survival is tied to the ability to make the cost of attacking it unacceptably high for the United States. Now here's where you come in. Imagine you in the Situation Room, and intelligence suggests North Korea is close to gaining a fully reliable ICBM capability. Do you support a risky preemptive strike before it's too late, knowing it could trigger a regional war and possible nuclear use? Or do you accept a nuclear-armed North Korea that can hit American cities? And rely on deterrence, the same uneasy logic that governed the US and Soviet relationship in the Cold War? Drop your answer in the comments. Would you choose preemption, deterrence, or something in between, like massive sanctions and cyber operations, to contain the threat? And if you want more videos that break down complex military and nuclear questions like, can North Korea really hit America with a nuclear missile? In clear, straight-talk analysis, tailored for a US audience, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next deep dive.